What's up, guys? I gotta hype myself up because this is an emotional video. I haven't done one of these in a while, I feel like. Gonna talk about something that's kind of hard for me to talk about because it's the biggest uncertainty in my life and in me as a person. So I used to really struggle with fatigue. I had to quit a job, and I was constantly finding that I wasn't able to do the same things that my friends were. And eventually I went to doctors for this, and I was told very different things by different people, and I had a series of really unpleasant and intense experiences. And this coupled with both of my parents got cancer, and my father died from cancer, and that cost like $40,000. My mother got cancer, and she survived the cancer, and that cost about $60,000. So by the time I was 16, I had seen two people expend inordinate amounts of money, and in one of the cases, the person didn't even live, and it didn't really do anything for them. In the other case with my mother, she spent years of her life working to pay that debt off. And that money could have gone to so many other things more relevant to her happiness and her skills and her progression as an individual. Getting cancer and surviving it, of course, it's amazing to survive, but that does a number on you, a huge number. And so the biggest thing that I struggle with is whether my fatigue in my life was caused by a disease or by the events that I went through growing up. Because there was also a relationship that I was in that was incredibly taxing. Because I had lost my feeling of family when my father died, I had this big void, and I tried to fill it by falling in love with people, and they were my grounding. I didn't care about myself at all. I just wanted somebody to care about because that brought meaning into my life, right? And for what it's worth, that's not a healthy way to exist. You can never, ever rely exclusively on one thing or person or especially not a person, for your happiness. You have to get most of your happiness from multiple things. Otherwise, you will be fucked. At some point, something is going to happen to you, and it's going to completely shatter everything that you think and everything that you feel. The only way to avoid this and to mitigate it is to learn to be happy from multiple things, not just from one person. And when you fall in love, this can be incredibly hard. Especially if you feel that your life had been relatively meaningless prior, right? And so I was in a situation where, given this, what I'm talking to you about, I stayed with somebody who was really toxic for me, because I perceived that that was better than being alone. It took me a long time to understand that being with the person ensured my loneliness and ensured that I would feel that way, because all of my love and effort was going into one individual instead of everybody I care for. And I regularly found myself in scenarios where I would want to make some grand, positive, emotional gesture to show how much I cared and to show how strongly I felt. And I would be, instead of getting any recognition of that back or anything like that back, it was very common to get trauma back, or some kind of fight, or some kind of anger. And I know that being in this situation over and over again, there was a part of me that just gave up. I feel it sometimes, and it just stops. Like my brain, I just go numb and catatonic. And that is a real force. I know that that exists in my life, and that contributed a lot to my fatigue. However, I don't know if that was everything. And that's the part that really sucks, is the uncertainty. Because, so essentially what happened is while I was in this relationship, I tested positive for a disease called Lyme disease. And at the time, I was really struggling with fatigue, and I knew I was in an intense situation, but I didn't understand because I was on ADD medication, I was on amphetamines, and I was falling asleep after like 2 or 3 hours into the day. I was just getting incredibly tired. And it's hard for me to remember what that was like now, because my life is completely and utterly different. There is almost nothing that's the same as how it used to be, okay? But I went to doctors to try and figure out what had happened or what was causing the fatigue. And that's when I tested positive for this disease called Lyme disease. Or at least this is what my doctor at the time told me. So then he prescribed me like 2 weeks of antibiotics and sent me to a specialist for follow-up. And I went to the specialist, and he just like yelled in my face that there's no way that I have Lyme disease, and I'm ludicrous for even going to him. Because I tested positive for a past infection of Lyme disease. I did not test positive for a current infection of Lyme disease. Essentially, this meant that antibodies in my body that indicate I had Lyme disease at some point were present, but antibodies in my body to indicate that I had Lyme disease now were not present. And this was a little bit hard for me, because I had thought that I had found something that I could start to work on to address the fatigue. And because reality is, yeah, everything's stressful, but once you know what you're dealing with, just move. You gotta keep moving. That's your only choice if you want to get better. You have to keep moving no matter what, and learn to do the things that will fix your life no matter how you feel, right? So I was a bit confused by this, because essentially this doctor just told me that I couldn't, there's no way I had it. And I didn't understand. And so I went back to the other doctor, and this is where it gets kind of blurry, because there were events that were happening at home as well, and this was completely resetting my attention span. It was making me forget everything and kind of have to restart a little bit. And these events didn't happen all the time, but there would be times where I would be up until 4 a.m. dealing with something, and I had to be at work for 10 hours, or like 8 to 10 hours at 6 a.m. And I had a very thought-provoking, intense job at the time. It was very intellectually demanding. So obviously when those events would happen, like of course I was tired, but I only slept for 2 hours, right? But there's a lot more to it than that, right? So I had the doctor tell me I had a disease, went to another doctor, they said there's no way that I do. And I thought, okay, I just listened to that doctor. And I was like, I just got to work on my life, my habits, that kind of thing. Make sure that I'm doing things to take better care of my body, to make sure that I'm being more regular in my life. And with time, I went back to the original doctor, because they're my general doctor. And I talked to them about the experience. And he was like kind of appalled at how the other doctor had handled the situation. So he said he was going to make sure not to recommend that doctor to other people, and then suggested me to a different specialist. And I believe I took a long time to go to the next specialist. I felt very about the situation, just because I have a lot of bitterness about medical stuff. And anytime I'm paying doctors money and I don't know who the doctor is, I don't believe they give a fuck about me. I just don't. I don't think that you should assume that because somebody is a doctor, that means they care about you. That just means it's their job. If you want proper treatment, you have to know somebody who is connected to you somehow and is a doctor. A friend who is a doctor. Or you have like a family doctor that you guys actually have a relationship with. If you do not have this situation, it is highly, highly unlikely that your doctor has your best interests at heart. And that is how I feel. And I also understand that I am biased because I watched both of my parents suffer so much and pay so much money. And it's terrifying to me how much money and how long people sacrifice just because somebody told them so when they have no connection, right? No connection to these people. So that caused a bit of delays before I got to the next specialist, okay? And around the same time that these delays are happening, I met someone through a work connection that was very, like somebody kind of would speak in the Lyme community, or Lyme disease. And I also met some other people who struggle with Lyme disease as well. And ultimately, what I realized was that if I keep pursuing this path, there will only be uncertainty. Most of these people have been struggling for 10 or 30 years, and they haven't found much progress. They don't really have lives that are that much better. They've just learned to cope with it. And I saw that if I continued to pursue that path, like to go to a doctor who was a Lyme literate medical doctor, right? That's not covered by insurance. So you're dealing with people who a lot of you out there will perceive that these are just fake doctors because insurance companies do not recognize long-term Lyme disease as a real thing. They literally treat a 2-week infection the same as a person who has been infected for 10 years. It's a degenerative disease. You can't do that. There's so much more to it. So what I found myself with was a decision to continue pursuing this path of talking to doctors who weren't going to believe anything about a disease causing this because my father died. That is every time I went to a doctor and I talked about fatigue, they were just like, you're depressed, your father's dead, this is very obvious, you need to be on antidepressants. And I understand that these kind of things have a short-term help. But I also know too many people who have spent 10 years on antidepressants and they still feel suicidal and they still struggle. And there's no way I'm just going to let somebody just tell me that that is a good decision, that that's a good path to walk down. And I was so lost. I was really scared because I was working on structure in my head. I had to work on getting more regularity into my life to increase the chance of having more energy, eating more regularly, doing all of these things, focusing on like my caffeination, making sure I wasn't over caffeinating so I didn't sleep, and paying attention to all of these things. And I found that I just was getting worse. And I was really, really scared because I thought I was going to die. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. So it's hard to keep track of what I'm talking about here. But I eventually went to another specialist, and they told me to, I had gone and gotten antibiotics, for something. I think I had like an eye infection or something. It was something minor that you just take like 2 or 3 days of antibiotics, or like some kind of cold, I don't remember. But I'd been on antibiotics, and so when I like plucked up the courage and went to the next specialist, it was just very like cookie cutter, just whatever. Like they didn't really care, but they didn't do anything to offend me. So I was like, I don't know, I gotta give this guy some more time to see if he's personable, see if he actually cares about me, if he's gonna listen, or if he's just processing me, you know? But he said that I had to make a new appointment and come back later because I was on antibiotics and that might mess up my test results. And again, this is, you know, I'm paying for all of, well, my mom's paying, somebody's paying for all this stuff. And after that, then the first really unpleasant experience happened with a doctor. And this is what really kind of knocked me. It kind of permanently, maybe not permanently, nothing's permanent, but I still have biases and preconceptions because of this event, okay? But before I get into that, I need to explain some more context. So I just talked to you about those two paths that I saw in front of me. How I could be like the people struggling with depression and prescribed antidepressants, or I could be like the people struggling with Lyme and paying tens and tens of thousands of dollars for different treatments. And I felt that I had to form myself into a person who acted as if both of these events could be true. And so, in order to best make the decision, I felt that my best decision was to find one of these Lyme-literate medical doctors, figure out what they prescribe people, and then to get it off of the internet. And to treat myself for as long as I could stand it, and then to stop. And from that point, to put everything behind me and act like I'm not a sick person. And that every single piece of fatigue that I ever feel is caused by my own decisions and my actions and the way that I live. But I knew that in order for me to think that way and really think that way, I had to perceive that I gave it my best shot and bought myself some time. And so that's essentially what I did. I found a regimen, a treatment regimen using some antibiotics that you can get for veterinary use without a prescription. These antibiotics were amoxicillin and flagyl. I don't recommend anybody ever do that. I was in a position of such extreme desperation. At this point, I had been fighting for 2 years with this, and I felt like I hadn't made any progress. And I felt like I had to do this. Because the reality is I couldn't afford to go to one of those specialists, especially if it's possible that I'm contributing to the fatigue through my habits. Because ultimately, it's not about that one thing is causing everything. They're both factors. There can be a disease in your habits. Both of them will make you fatigued. Okay? So, I met with a doctor. And I told them, I was like, okay, I'm going to use a veterinary antibiotics to try and buy myself some time from this. Because I understand that if I try and go through this, I will have to pay people a lot of money to get to this point. And I understand that this is not what you recommend as the doctor. But I felt that if I could not get through that dynamic with the doctor, I felt that meant that I did not feel strong enough to do such a reckless thing as to take drugs off the internet, especially antibiotics, for 3 months. I mean, it was cycled, so I wasn't constantly on them. It was literally, I just found something online and then went with it. That's an incredibly risky and bad decision for most people, okay? To help you understand how intense my situation was, to get you to articulate, I felt that was what I had to do. I was so terrified and so lost that I thought that was my only option, okay? And so I did that. I made an appointment and I talked to the doctor. I told them the experience, and it was surreal because she listened to me. She understood. And she wasn't like just believing everything that I said, but she took time. She like extended her next appointment and listened to me like a person. And it was so surreal because I went in there expecting to be attacked because I was doing something that the doctor's not going to recommend. And this doctor very much did say that. They said that I can't recommend that you do this at all. But, because I can't check your vitals, I can't check for the things that these drug interactions might, cause. I can monitor levels of things, right? And, we communicated about these things. And it completely blew me away. I felt like I'd found somebody a doctor who cared. And so I left, and I got some vitals done, and we did a baseline for the treatment, a starting point, right? Just to make sure, because you have to check your vitals and everything while you're doing some kind of intense therapy pretty regularly to make sure that if something is going a bit different, that you catch it, you notice it, right? So before I started the treatment, we did that. Then we agreed to make an appointment a month later, when I was a month into the treatment, right? And so at the time, the way it worked is I was like on for a certain amount of time and then off, and then on the antibiotics and then off of them and then on them. It was like on for 2 weeks, off for 1, something like that. It's called like cycling. And I went to that follow-up appointment, and my guard was down. I was feeling really shitty because when you're on treatment, everything gets way, way worse. It's really hard. And I don't like to complain about stuff at all, but when I was on treatment, that is when I had the most suicidal thoughts that I've ever had in my life. I didn't actually want to kill myself because I knew it was part of treatment, but I regularly thought if I felt this way all the time, I would want to die. It was mortifying. And I was really vulnerable, like really weak. And I was expecting to go talk to this doctor that I'd made this connection with. I was expecting to talk to this person that was proving things kind of wrong to me. And so I went in with my guard not down at all, and it was a different doctor. And I was confused because I'd kind of specified that it would be with the other doctor. And so I asked her why. And she said, oh, that person's not with us anymore. So that doctor had been fired. And the doctor that I was face-to-face with knew nothing about me. And all that they were going to see is that I had been treating myself with antibiotics for a month. They didn't know any of the pre-work. They didn't know any of my story or anything. And the moment I saw that it was a different person, I just like shattered a little bit because there was no way that this interaction was going to go smoothly. Like no way at all. Because I was there for like follow-up on something I was doing that was against the doctor's advice. And that's one thing when you've worked with the doctor, you've talked about them, you've communicated with them, you've gotten your fights out. It's a completely different thing when that's just how you present everything to the doctor, right? And obviously this doctor was not having it at all. She was really fed up, just got in my face and yelled. And not yelled like really intensely, but just, for a doctor to be like this, like talking to you is, you know, she wasn't like, I wasn't scared, but I was incredibly vulnerable. And it just kind of crushed me. And I went back for another follow-up because obviously I wasn't going to stop what I was doing. It's just this doctor was different than the original one, and that really screwed things up. Because you need to develop a relationship with somebody. You need to like work on things over time, especially when you're dealing with something like this. And to this day, like I went through with that. I did 3 months of treatment. It's also relevant to understand that I didn't have very much money at all at the time, and I couldn't work as much when I was on treatment because I got much sicker. I had to sleep a lot. So the girl I was in love with at the time paid for my treatment. And I went into the treatment feeling like I had met someone who I could be around for a long time and be happy with, who wasn't abusive. And I came out of treatment in a relationship with somebody who was ashamed of me and whose whole family thought that I was a lunatic. And, you know, she left me, and I really never heard from her again. And that, you know, really bothers me because I don't have enough family to lose family like that. And that this series of events changed a lot about me, especially with how I am with people, because I love people. And I want to be around the right kind of people in the long run. And I don't want the people that I care most about to leave me. I don't want to go through that again. And the only way that I perceive that I can prevent this from happening again is by having love for other things. And essentially, my YouTube channel was spawned from this breakup. I just poured myself into making YouTube videos. And that became where that energy, I had obsessed and fixated on how to be as loving as I possibly could to the people I care, the person that I care most about. How I could get any interest they already have, anything that they do, how I can make it more convenient for them, how I can bring the things that they care about closer to them, how I can ease their burdens, and how I can make their traumas less traumatic, how I can make them question how they feel about people by being so good to them that it confuses them and makes them think. And YouTube completely changed everything, really. Because after that, I wasn't in love with a person anymore, and I felt alive. I had something to do that, no, if I'm ever lost, if I'm ever doubtful, I can just pull out a camera and talk to it. 5 minutes makes a little bit of progress. 10 minutes, that's healthy. 15, 20 minutes of talking about one specific subject, man, it brings me a lot of perspective. And by making these videos where I expose these parts of myself to you guys, I'm also talking to myself. I'm talking to all the people that I care about. Because I think these things that I experienced have put me in a position where I can be an incredibly positive, kind person who makes a meaningful difference in the lives of those that I love. Because I've lost most of the people that I've cared about at some point in my life. And you gotta be happy. It doesn't matter what happens to you. What matters is what you think about it. What matters is how you flip things, because you are here, you are whoever you are, and whatever has happened to you has happened to you. You have to find ways to make the things that happen to you your strengths. You have to turn them around and make the things that you are most scared of the things that you are most willing to talk about. It's the only way to make the best out of this world. And the takeaway that I want you to have with this is that if you think that humans are just doomed to be depressed, if you think that that's the natural human condition, it's complete bullshit. Humans are patterns. We replicate things. When you are around happy, fulfilled people, you feel happy and fulfilled. Not all the time, not always. There's still anger and sadness and depression sometimes. But if you think that depression is a natural human state, that will guarantee that you are always depressed. And that's coming from somebody who's lost a lot. And trust me, happiness is everything. If you become a happy person, you draw people to you. You become magnetic. You become able to give something to somebody that is so much more valuable than any physical thing. And I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to do everything that you can to focus on your happiness. You are the only one in the world who knows what's best for you. Don't let other people tell you that they know what's best, because they only know what's best for them and all the people they've met before you. They don't know you. Only you can know what's best. Make sure to always remember that. And listen to people's advice when you want to be like them. If you don't want to be like them, then just be polite. All right? All right, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Ciao.